They said the desert would chew her up, that no soft-spoken nurse from Boston could survive out here, not with the rattlesnakes, the fevers, and the ghosts of men who came west to forget who they were. But Clara Whitmore didn't come to forget. She came to save, and in a land where medicine meant whiskey and fire meant warning, she found something far more dangerous than illness. A man who didn't speak much, but saw right through her. Captain Everett Cole, part soldier, part ghost, part heartbeat of a people no map ever got right. What started as a duty post turned into a war of belief, of belonging, of love too raw for cities, and too true for silence. What would you do if love showed up on a bad leg, carrying a rifle, and asked nothing but truth in return? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read each one like a letter from the old country. And if you want more stories carved from grit and fire, hit that subscribe and ride with me into the next chapter. Yidatad, the Arizona Territory sun, a relentless eye in an achingly blue sky, beat down on Clara Whitmore as if to bake the very ideals right out of her. She was 27, a graduate of a respectable Boston nursing program, her mind filled with Lister's theories and Nightingale's resolve. Her hands, she believed, were meant to heal, but the northern Arizona outpost, perched precariously near the brooding lands of the Apache, felt less like a place of healing and more like a testament to decay. The medical station was a crumbling adobe hut, its shelves sparsely populated with a few cloudy bottles of carbolic acid, some rolls of yellowed linen, and a prevailing scent of dust and despair. Her patients, when they came, were weathered settlers and stoic native peoples, their ailments often complicated by a deeper faith in sacred spring water, tobacco smoke blown with intention, or the power of a well-worn fetish. Clara, with her starched apron that seemed to wilt the moment she stepped outside, felt like an alien creature, her carefully learned science a foreign tongue in this land of ancient beliefs and stark survival. She first laid eyes on Captain Everett Cole when he carried the limp body of a logger into her ramshackle clinic. The man was bleeding profusely from a gunshot wound, a stray bullet from a hunting accident. They said. Cole moved with a quiet, almost unnerving grace for a man of his size. He was perhaps a handful of years older than Clara, his heritage etched in the strong planes of his face, a blend of sun-darkened European ancestry and the unmistakable caste of the people. The which tribe? She couldn't yet say. His eyes, the color of shadowed granite, were watchful, assessing, holding a chill that seemed at odds with the gentle way he handled the injured man. He was, she'd been told, the captain of the local militia, a man who knew the mountains and the ways of its inhabitants, both settler and native, better than any other. He needs help, Cole stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of inflection. He laid the logger on the narrow cot that served as Clara's examination table. Clara's training kicked in. She moved swiftly, assessing the wound, calling for boiled water, her hands already reaching for the precious carbolic. The air in the small room grew thick with the metallic scent of blood and the murmurs of the logger's companions, their faces grim, their distrust of her palpable. "The boy needs Singing Bear," one of them muttered. A raw-boned man with eyes like faded denim. Not this. City woman's fussing. Clara ignored them, her focus entirely on staunching the bleeding, cleaning the wound, her brow furrowed in concentration. Everett Cole stood near the doorway, a silent sentinel, his expression unreadable. He neither endorsed her efforts nor sided with the dissenters. She worked for over an hour, stitching, cleansing, bandaging, her every move precise, born of a knowledge these men couldn't fathom. When she finally straightened, sweat plastering her auburn hair to her temples, the logger was pale, but his breathing was more even, the bleeding controlled. "He'll live, if infection doesn't set in," she said, her voice tight with exhaustion and a familiar defensiveness. "He needs rest and quiet." And this dressing changed twice a day. The men grumbled, but eventually carried their companion out, their skepticism still clinging to them like the trail dust on their boots. "City woman with no faith," she heard one of them say as they departed, the words a casual dismissal that stung more than she cared to admit. Clara sighed, turning to tidy the bloody mess. Only then did she notice Everett Cole was still there, his gaze fixed on her. He offered no praise, no judgment. He simply nodded once, then turned and left. The next morning, she found a heavy clay jug of clean, cool water just outside her door. There was no note, no explanation, just the water, a silent acknowledgement, perhaps, or merely a practical gesture in a land where clean water was a precious commodity. Life at the outpost settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation and small, hard-won victories. Clara learned to make do, to stretch her meager supplies, to listen more than she spoke, trying to understand the deep currents of belief that governed the lives around her. She learned that Everett Cole, despite his stoicism, was a man of quiet honor, often appearing when trouble brewed, a calming presence who navigated the treacherous currents between the settlers and the Apache with a skill born of his dual heritage. He rarely spoke of himself, yet his actions often spoke volumes. Her deepest-held convictions were truly tested when a young Apache woman named Nalin was brought to her, writhing in the agony of a complicated childbirth. The baby was breech, and Nalin was losing strength. The tribe's medicine man, an ancient figure named Gray Willow, along with Nalin's fearful family, had already begun a ceremony outside Clara's hut, the rhythmic chant of prayers and the scent of sacred herbs filling the air. They wanted to call upon the spirits of the ancestors to guide the baby into the world. Clara knew, with a cold certainty, that without intervention, both mother and child would likely perish. "She needs surgery," Clara stated, trying to keep her voice steady as she addressed Nalin's anxious husband and Gray Willow, whose eyes, ancient and knowing, seemed to see right through her. "I need to turn the baby. It's the only way." The request was met with stony silence, then outright refusal to cut into the body. To interfere so directly with the sacred process of birth was a profound taboo. "The spirits will guide," Gray Willow said, his voice raspy with age. Desperate, Clara sought out Everett Cole. She found him conferring with a scout near the militia's small stockade. "Captain," she began, her voice urgent, "Nalin will die. Her baby will die. Their rituals. They won't be enough this time. You have to make them understand." Everett listened, his granite eyes unblinking. He knew the weight of their traditions, the fear of breaking them. He also knew the grim finality of death. For a long moment, he was silent, caught, Clara realized, in the chasm between her modern urgings and his people's ancient ways. It was in that moment, watching the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the flicker of some deep, internal conflict in his eyes, that she began to grasp the profound loneliness of his existence. A man who belonged fully to neither world, yet bore the responsibility of bridging both. Finally, he nodded. "I will speak with Gray Willow." The negotiation was long and fraught. Clara waited outside the circle of worried family, hearing the rise and fall of Everett's voice, calm and measured, interwoven with the more impassioned tones of the tribal elders. Eventually, Everett emerged, his face etched with weariness. "Grey Willow has agreed," he said, "but you must understand, Nurse Whitmore, if you fail, the consequences will be severe, and even if you succeed, there will be a price." With Nolan's husband looking on, his face a mask of fear and hope, Clara performed the difficult internal version, her hands guided by skill, adrenaline, and a silent prayer. The air in the small hut was thick with tension, the only sounds Nolan's whimpers and Clara's own ragged breathing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a healthy baby boy cried out his first defiant breath. Nalin, exhausted but alive, wept with relief. Success, but Everett's words proved true, while Nolan's family offered tearful, grateful thanks. Grey Willow approached Clara. "You have saved them," he acknowledged, his gaze unwavering. "But you have disturbed the spirits. You touched what is sacred with uninitiated hands. For 7 days you will not step upon the ground of our sacred spring, nor enter the ceremonial kiva. It is the way." Clara accepted the pronouncement with a nod. It was a small price, she thought, for 2 lives. Yet, as she walked back to her lonely hut that evening, the weight of her own isolation, mirrored by what she'd glimpsed in Everett, settled upon her. She was an outsider, her knowledge a source of both wonder and suspicion. The incident dredged up memories she usually kept locked away. The hushed, accusing whispers in the corridors of Boston General. The grieving face of Mayor Thompson after his young daughter, Lily, had succumbed to a fever that Clara, for all her diligence, couldn't break. It hadn't been her fault. The supervising physicians had eventually, reluctantly, conceded. The illness had been too aggressive, but the shadow of that loss, the subtle ostracization by colleagues who saw her as somehow unlucky or perhaps incompetent, had been a heavy burden. It was that profound sense of failure, that questioning of her own worthiness to heal, that had driven her from the city, seeking a place where perhaps her skills could matter more than her perceived failings. Here, in this raw, unforgiving land, the question still haunted her. Was she truly capable of saving anyone? Did she even deserve to? The cypress wood necklace she wore, a simple, carved pendant her mother had given her, felt heavy against her skin. It was a reminder of a softer time, of unwavering belief in her. Now, that belief felt like a distant dream. Months later, during a sudden, brutal Apache raid on a small outlying homestead, Clara found herself treating the wounded amidst chaos and gunfire. A young Navajo girl, caught in the crossfire, lay near death, her small chest barely rising. Clara did what she could, but the child's life was slipping away. In a gesture of desperate, helpless prayer, Clara unfastened the cypress necklace and gently placed it in the girl's small, still hand. "For comfort," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "and for courage." She had been injured herself, a glancing blow to her arm, but her own pain was secondary to the grief she felt for the child. Weeks passed. Clara, recovering from her wound, her spirit bruised and weary, wrestled with a profound sense of despair, the harshness of this land, the constant struggle between life and death, the weight of her own perceived inadequacies. It all felt overwhelming. She was cleaning her meager instruments one afternoon, the futility of her efforts pressing down on her, when a small shadow fell across the doorway. It was the Navajo girl, no longer dying, but frail and walking with the help of her mother. In her outstretched palm lay the cypress necklace. The child's dark eyes, luminous and serious, met Clara's. Without a word, the girl stepped forward and, with a shy, solemn grace, lifted the necklace and placed it back around Clara's neck. Her small fingers fumbled with the clasp, then settled it against Clara's skin. It was a return not just of a keepsake, but of hope, a silent testament to a life reclaimed. Clara was tending to a prospector with a badly infected hand, the man delirious with fever, his chances slim. She had done everything she knew, exhausted her resources and her spirit. She felt the familiar tendrils of despair coiling around her, the old Boston ghosts whispering of failure. She was about to turn away, to concede defeat, when Everett Cole's quiet voice cut through her thoughts. He had been standing in the doorway, watching. For how long? She didn't know. You're wavering, Nurse Whitmore. It wasn't an accusation, merely an observation. Clara's shoulders sagged. I don't know if I can save him. Captain, I don't know if I'm... Enough. The confession was a raw, painful whisper. Everett stepped further into the room, his presence filling the small space. His granite eyes softened, just a fraction, but enough for Clara to see past the soldier to the man. Clara, he said, the first time he'd used her given name, his voice unexpectedly gentle. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. Keep fighting. For him, for yourself. His words, simple and direct, landed like a lifeline. You just have to be present, not infallible, not a miracle worker, just present, to offer what skill she had, what comfort she could, without the crushing weight of needing to guarantee the outcome. It was a permission she hadn't realized she so desperately needed. A small measure of the tightness around her heart eased. She looked at the prospector, then back at Everett. A new resolve firmed her chin. She picked up a clean cloth. More cool water, please. Captain, we're not done here. Everett Cole held her gaze for a long moment, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips before he turned to fetch the water. The cypress necklace felt warm against her skin. The Arizona sun still beat down, but for the first time, Clara Whitmore felt she might just be strong enough to stand tall beneath it. Everett Cole's words, "You just have to be present," echoed in Clara Whitmore's mind long after the prospector, against all odds, began his slow mend. They became a quiet mantra, a counterpoint to the ghosts of Boston that had haunted her for so long. She didn't miraculously shed her self-doubt, but a subtle shift occurred within her, a willingness to meet the demands of this unforgiving land on its own terms. Rather than through the lens of her past failures, Clara began to truly inhabit her life at the outpost. The starched Boston aprons gave way to more practical calico, her hands growing calloused from chopping firewood for the clinic's small stove and tending a meager garden of hardy vegetables. She learned from the native women which wild herbs held soothing properties, which berries were safe, and which roots could ease a fever. She started a ledger, not just of patients, but of symptoms, of remedies both traditional and scientific. Her entries penned late at night by the flickering lamplight, a quiet chronicle of her evolving understanding. The desolate landscape, once a symbol of her isolation, began to reveal its own harsh beauty, its subtle palette of ochre, rust, and seiche. Everett Cole found himself drawn to the small adobe clinic more often. He'd appear with a freshly dressed deer hide, a brace of rabbits, or another jug of clean water from a hidden spring he knew. Sometimes, It was just a single, resilient wildflower, plucked from some tenacious crevice in the rocks, left on her windowsill without a word. Their conversations, when they happened, were like tentative explorations of a shared, uncharted territory. There was an undeniable pull, a nascent tenderness, yet it was always tempered by a shared caution, a wariness born of past hurts they had yet to name to each other. Slowly, in fragments, their histories began to surface. Clara learned of Everett's Apache wife, Mourning Dove, lost years ago in a brutal retaliatory raid by a rival band, a grief that had carved lines of stoic sorrow around his eyes and explained the fierce, protective shell he wore. He, in turn, came to understand that Clara's flight from Boston wasn't just about a single patient lost. She spoke of a fiancé, a promising young doctor himself, who had seen her dedication to nursing, her relentless pursuit of skill, not as a virtue, but as a rival to the comfortable, socially acceptable life he envisioned for them. The engagement had fractured under the weight of his expectations and her refusal to diminish herself. He wanted a wife, Clara said one evening, staring into the dying embers of her small fire. Not a colleague, and certainly not one with her own ambitions. The fragile peace of their growing understanding was shattered when the summer rains came with a vengeance, swelling the normally placid little Colorado into a raging torrent that flooded the lowlands. And with the receding waters came the sickness, typhoid. It spread like wildfire through the scattered homesteads and the nearby Apache encampments. Clara's small clinic was overwhelmed. Cots spilled out into the dusty yard, the air thick with the smell of sickness and fear. She worked relentlessly, her slim frame fueled by coffee and a desperate will. But her supplies dwindled at an alarming rate. Quinine, carbolic, even clean linen, all were desperately low. Seeing Clara near collapse, her face gaunt, her eyes burning with fatigue and unshed tears, Everett made a decision. Without a word to her, he saddled his rangy buckskin and rode out, heading for Prescott, a grueling 60-mile journey across treacherous terrains. To procure more medicine, he pushed himself and his horse to their limits, acquiring the vital supplies, only to be nearly ambushed by a band of renegade outlaws on his return, escaping through a hail of bullets with little more than a graze to his arm and an unshakable resolve when he finally rode back into the outpost days later. Caked in dust, swaying with exhaustion, but with precious saddlebags full of medicine. The sight of him was, for Clara, akin to witnessing a miracle. The remaining settlers and Apache families, who had watched Clara battle the sickness day and night, now saw this man, one they respected for his knowledge of the land and his quiet strength, risk everything for her and for them. It was a turning point. The whispers of city woman faded, replaced by a new, more reverent moniker, white woman with warrior spirit. They began to trust her, not just her skills, but her heart. Amidst the receding tide of the typhoid epidemic, another kind of tragedy struck. A small Apache encampment, not allied with the local bands, was raided by unknown assailants, likely opportunistic drifters. Only one survivor was found amidst the devastation, a boy, no more than 3 years old, his eyes wide with a terror that rendered him mute. He was brought to the clinic, physically unharmed but spiritually broken. None of the local Apache families would take him. He was, they whispered, touched by the spirits of the dead, a bearer of bad fortune. Clara, her heart aching for the child's silent suffering, wouldn't hear of it. He's a child, she declared, her voice ringing with a conviction that brooked no argument. He needs care, not superstition, despite the worried murmurs and the outright disapproval of some. She took the boy in, fashioning a small bed for him in a corner of her own cramped living quarters attached to the clinic. She named him Tesco, a word she'd heard meaning Little Cedar, for his resilience. Everett, at first, kept his distance from the boy, his interactions polite but reserved. Clara understood. Tesco was a painful reminder of all he had lost, but the child, with his solemn eyes and tentative, rare smiles, had a way of burrowing into the most guarded of hearts. Slowly, Everett began to unbend. He'd whittle small figures for Tesco from scraps of wood, his large, calloused hands surprisingly deft. He'd let the boy trail after him as he went about his duties, sometimes even hoisting him onto his broad shoulders. One evening, as Clara was tending to Tesco, who had finally succumbed to sleep after a bout of night terrors, Everett stood watching from the doorway. The lamplight softened the harsh lines of his face. "He looks peaceful," Everett said, his voice a low rumble. He paused, then added, almost to himself, "He's a good boy. Our boy." The words, so simple, so unexpected, hung in the air. Our boy. They were a quiet acknowledgement, a binding thread woven between the three of them, forming an unconventional family in this unconventional land. Tesco, the child of tragedy, became a symbol of a fragile, burgeoning hope, a bridge between their two worlds, and another deep, unspoken reason for them to remain rooted in this place. The following spring, a letter arrived for Clara, bearing the official seal of a prestigious Boston hospital. It was an offer, laudatory and impressive, to return east and assume the role of superintendent of nurses at a newly established training school. It was everything she had once dreamed of. Professional recognition, a chance to shape the future of her calling, a return to the civilized world she had left behind. She showed the letter to Everett, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked not at her, but out towards the distant, purple-hued mountains. "It's a fine offer, Clara," he said finally, "a testament to who you are." He offered no plea for her to stay, no hint of his own desires. Instead, a few days later, he presented her with a small, beautifully crafted leather-bound journal and a new fountain pen. "To write the next chapter," he said, his voice gruff with an emotion he rarely showed. "Wherever you are." Clara wrestled with her decision for many sleepless nights. Boston represented a life of comfort, of intellectual stimulation, of undeniable professional achievement. Redemption, this small, dusty outpost, offered what? A life of constant struggle, of hardship, of isolation. Yet, it also offered a profound sense of purpose, a connection to the land and its people, and a quiet, steadfast love that had taken root in the most unlikely of soils. One morning, just as the sun was painting the eastern sky, she opened the door of her clinic. She had expected the usual quiet of the early hour. Instead, a long line of people, settlers, Apache, even a few of the Navajo families from further out, stood waiting patiently. Some held children. Others supported elderly relatives. It was the day she had designated for typhoid inoculations, a preventative measure she had fought hard to introduce. They had come. They trusted her. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of belonging so profound it almost brought tears to her eyes. She turned and found Everett leaning against the clinic wall, watching her, his eyes knowing, She walked over to him. The letter from Boston forgotten. "Let's write it here, Everett," she said softly, her voice sure and clear. A slow smile spread across his face, reaching those granite eyes and transforming them. "Figured you might say that." Together, they didn't just run a clinic. They nurtured a community. They started a small school in an unused corner of the expanded stagecoach station. Clara taught English, reading, and basic hygiene. Everett taught tracking, local lore, and the names of the stars. Young Tesco, bright and quick, thrived under their care, a constant, joyful presence. The Navajo girl Clara had once given her cypress necklace to. Now a young woman named Denali returned, her quiet intelligence and gentle hands making her Clara's first, indispensable nursing assistant. One day, an official-looking delegation arrived from the territorial capital, full of praise for the redemption model. They offered substantial funding, a grander building, a proposal to establish a frontier health school that would serve the entire border region, with Clara and Everett at its head. It was tempting, another form of validation. But that evening, as they sat with Tesco between them, watching the desert stars emerge, Everett voiced what Clara already felt. "Let them come to us, Clara," he said, his arm resting comfortably around her shoulders. "That's how the land teaches. Patience, presence." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, the cypress necklace cool against her skin, her heart full. The grand institutions and accolades of the East held no allure. Here, amidst the dust, the blood, and the things unspoken but deeply felt, she had found her purpose, her peace, and her love. The next chapter was already being written, not in a Boston ledger, but in the resilient heart of the Arizona Territory, the quiet rhythm of life that Clara and Everett had painstakingly woven at the outpost, with its small school and burgeoning clinic, always felt fragile, a tender shoot in harsh soil. The Arizona Territory, for all its stark beauty, was a land that held its breath, acutely aware of the thin veneer of peace. That veneer began to crack with the arrival of men who rode under the guise of weary hunters, their drawls too smooth, their eyes too restless. They were whispers first, then shadows, ex-Confederate raiders, disenfranchised and dangerous, seeking to plunder what little the borderlands offered, medicine, gold, and, with a chilling barbarity, women from the isolated native encampments. Everett Cole felt their presence like a change in the wind, a familiar tension coiling in his gut. He'd seen their kind before, men hollowed out by war and defeat, now filled with a predatory emptiness. He doubled the patrols of his mixed militia, a motley but loyal group of settlers and Apache scouts who trusted his leadership implicitly. The blow, when it came, was swift and personal. One moonless night, as Clara was banking the embers in her small stove, the door to her clinic burst open. Before she could scream, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, another binding her arms. The raiders, led by a gaunt, cruel-eyed man named Jebediah Stone, had bypassed Everett's patrols. They didn't want supplies. Not yet. They wanted a guide. They wanted Everett Cole to lead them to a hidden Navajo canyon, rumored to be a sanctuary where the tribe kept their winter stores and, more importantly to Stone, their women and children. Clara was their leverage. The ultimatum was delivered to Everett at dawn by a terrified settler, his nurse, unharmed for now, in exchange for safe passage into the canyon. Everett's face, already etched with the harsh lines of his life, became a mask of cold fury. There was no choice, yet surrender was not an option. He gathered his men. "We ride," was all he said, his voice like chips of granite. The pursuit was a desperate chase through treacherous, broken country. Stone was cunning, leaving false trails. But Everett knew this land as he knew his own heartbeat. He led his small, determined band, a mix of grim-faced settlers and Apache warriors whose own families were now threatened, tracking the raiders relentlessly. The confrontation erupted in a narrow, rain-slicked arroyo. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, a deadly rain amidst the sudden desert downpour that had turned the dust to slick mud. Everett fought with a cold, focused rage, his movements precise, deadly. He saw Clara, tied to a horse held by one of Stone's men, her face pale, but her eyes blazing defiance. In the chaos, as he worked his way closer, a bullet tore through his left shoulder, spinning him around. The pain, a white-hot sear, but he didn't go down. He fired, his shot true, taking down the man holding Clara's horse. His men pressed the advantage, and the remaining raiders, their leader Stone among them, broke and fled into the storm-lashed wilderness, leaving Clara behind, back in the dim, lamplit confines of her clinic. The roles were reversed. It was Clara, her hands trembling despite her best efforts, who cleaned and stitched Everett's ragged wound. The bullet had gone clean through, but the tissue damage was considerable. Rain lashed against the adobe walls, a mournful counterpoint to their ragged breathing. Everett watched her, his dark eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Pain, certainly, but something else, something deeper and more unsettling. "You shouldn't stay here, Clara," he said, his voice raspy, the words stark against the drumming rain. "This place, it eats good people, devours them whole." It was the first time he had voiced such a direct plea, such a raw admission of his fear for her. Clara didn't reply with words. Her suturing finished. She gently laid her hand on his uninjured shoulder, her touch a silent answer, a reassurance. Later, they sat by the small stove, the fire casting dancing shadows, the scent of brewing coffee and antiseptic mingling in the air. They didn't speak, didn't touch, but the space between them vibrated with an unspoken understanding, a profound shift in the landscape of their hearts. A week later, as Everett's shoulder began to mend, an official-looking dispatch arrived for Clara. It was from the territorial governor's office, or so it seemed, bearing an official-looking, if slightly smudged, seal. The letter was curt, informing her that due to unforeseen budgetary cuts and escalating unrest, the medical outpost was to be indefinitely closed. She was instructed to pack her essentials and report to Prescott for reassignment, presumably back east. The news struck Clara like a physical blow. To leave now, when she had finally begun to feel a part of this place, when her connection to Everett felt so terrifyingly real. It was unthinkable. Yet, the directive was clear. Everett read the letter, his expression grim. "It seems," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "Boston will have you back after all." The pain in his eyes, quickly masked, was a knife to Clara's heart. She couldn't see the faint discrepancies in the official stationery, couldn't know that the letter was a clever forgery, orchestrated by a slick arms dealer named Marcus Thorne, no relation to Elias, but a common enough name to pass unnoticed. Thorne had been trying to sell a shipment of faulty rifles to the local Apache bands, promising them an advantage against their enemies, and Clara's honest assessments and growing influence were a distinct impediment to his charade. With her gone, he reasoned, The tribes would be more pliable. With a heavy heart, Clara began to pack. The farewell to Everett was an agony of unspoken words, of yearnings too profound to voice. She left him a carefully penned letter, filled with gratitude and a sorrow that stained the pages. The journey to Prescott was a blur of grief, but along the trail, she encountered a circuit judge she had once treated for a badly broken leg, a man known for his sharp mind and integrity. When she mentioned the abrupt closure of the outpost, he frowned. Closure? First, I've heard of it. Miss Whitmore. And I just came from the governor's office myself not 3 days past. No such order was discussed. A cold suspicion began to dawn on Clara. The smudged seal, the unusual haste. She pressed the judge for details about any recent arms dealings or suspicious traders in the region. His information, combined with her own unease, painted a disturbing picture. Marcus Thorne. The name resonated with a conversation she'd overheard between two anxious Apache leaders just before she'd departed. Clara didn't hesitate. She turned her hired buggy around. Pushing the horses with a desperate urgency, she returned to the Arizona territory to find a tense standoff brewing. Marcus Thorne, emboldened by her absence, was on the verge of finalizing his deal, not just with some Apache factions, but, as Clara discovered through a frantic warning from young Denali's, also with Jebediah Stone's regrouped raiders. It was a setup for a bloodbath, a small, vicious border war fueled by faulty weapons and false promises. Clara's unexpected reappearance, her knowledge of the forged letter, and her impassioned appeal to both the Apache elders she had treated and Everett's militia, exposed Thorne's treachery. The arms dealer was apprehended, his cache of defective weapons confiscated, and the simmering conflict averted, thanks in no small part to the city woman who had refused to stay gone. Peace, however, was always a fleeting commodity. Not long after, the late summer monsoons, which had threatened for weeks, finally unleashed their fury. Rain fell in solid sheets for days, and the dry washes and canyons became raging. Chocolate-brown rivers. One terrible night, a section of the canyon wall above the main Navajo settlement, already destabilized by the relentless downpour, gave way. A monstrous landslide of mud, rock, and debris thundered down, obliterating several hogans, a torrent of earth and water sweeping through the village. Clara and Everett, alerted by a terrified runner, rushed to the scene. The devastation was horrific. A raging, debris-choked torrent now separated them from a handful of survivors clinging precariously to a small, rapidly eroding island of earth in the middle of the floodwaters. Children were crying, their voices thin against the roar of the water. Without a second thought for her own safety, Clara, securing a rope around her waist with Everett and other men holding the other end, waded into the treacherous current. Determined to reach them, she had almost made it to the first child when a massive log, swept downstream, struck her, tearing the rope from the men's grasp. She was sucked under, tumbling helplessly in the churning, muddy water. For a heart-stopping moment, she vanished. Then Everett, with a raw cry that was torn from his very soul, plunged into the maelstrom after her. He fought the current with a desperate strength, his injured shoulder screaming in protest, his good hand flailing for purchase. He reached her just as she was about to be swept into a pile of jagged rocks. Grabbing a handful of her sodden dress, his grip like iron, he dragged her, battered and half-conscious, towards the bank, where eager hands from the very Navajo people who had once viewed her with suspicion pulled them both to safety. Everett's right hand was mangled, Crushed between two logs as he'd shielded Clara, they lay side by side in Clara's small clinic, tended by Denali and a grateful, sorrowful Nalin. Clara's lungs ached, her body bruised, but she was alive. Everett's hand was heavily bandaged, the pain intense, but his gaze, when it met Clara's, was filled with a fierce, unwavering light. Sometime during that long night, as their fevered hands found each other in the darkness, they wept for the lives lost, for their own miraculous survival, and for the undeniable, unbreakable truth that neither of them could ever truly leave this place, or each other. It had claimed them, body and soul. Later, as they were recovering, the long silences between them became filled with a new kind of intimacy. Clara had often wondered about the source of the profound sorrow that sometimes shadowed Everett's eyes, the restless way he would often patrol the perimeter of the settlement late into the night, a solitary, watchful figure. One cool evening, as they sat outside the clinic, watching the stars begin to prick the velvety darkness, she finally asked him, "Everett, why do you walk the border every night? What are you looking for?" He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the distant, brooding mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, heavy with a grief that seemed bottomless. "Because I once led death across it, Clara," and the story spilled out, a torrent of pain held back for too many years. He had been younger then, a scout for the Union Army during the latter days of the Civil War. His knowledge of the terrain invaluable. He had believed, naively perhaps, in the cause, in a unified nation. But one fateful day, he had guided a column of soldiers to a hostile encampment, only to witness a massacre, a brutal, indiscriminate slaughter of men, women, and children. Among them, he later learned, were members of his wife Mourning Dove's extended family. Innocents caught in a conflict not of their making. Mourning Dove herself had been lost not long after, in what he now suspected was a direct consequence of that very violence, a cycle of vengeance and despair. His guilt was a living thing, a shadow that walked with him always. The guilt of a soldier who had served a nation that betrayed his wife's people. The guilt of a man of mixed blood who felt he had, however indirectly, brought destruction upon those who shared his heritage. Clara listened, her heart aching for him, for the impossible burden he carried. She reached out, her hand covering his, her touch a silent offering of solace, of understanding. There were no easy words, no simple comfort for a pain so profound. But in that shared vulnerability, under the vast, indifferent stars of the Arizona Territory, their souls truly met. Two wounded healers finding refuge not from the harshness of the land, but within it and within each other, the dust, the blood, the unspoken sorrows. They were all part of the tapestry now, a story of survival, of love, and of a hard-won, resilient peace. The raw confessions shared in the aftermath of the landslide, like sutures on a deep wound, began to knit Clara and Everett together in ways neither had anticipated. Everett's admission of his past, the heavy mantle of guilt he carried from his days as a Union scout, explained the shadows in his eyes, the almost penitent way he patrolled the borders of their small world each night. Clara, in turn, felt the last vestiges of her Boston self receding, replaced by a woman shaped by the Arizona sun and the resilient spirit of its people. Yet, the land remained a harsh mistress, and the wounds that didn't bleed were often the deepest. The prestigious offer from Boston for Clara to head a new nursing school still lay on the small table in her clinic. a tangible reminder of a life she could reclaim, a life of order, intellectual pursuit, and the kind signs of safety this territory could never truly promise. Everett, more than anyone, seemed acutely aware of this discrepancy. In the weeks that followed their shared ordeal and his bearing of his soul, a subtle distance crept into his demeanor. He was still present, his support unwavering, but a certain guardedness returned, a reluctance to bridge the final gap between them. Clara sensed his withdrawal was not from lack of feeling, but from a painful conviction that he couldn't offer her what he thought she deserved, a proper house. "Clara," he'd said once, his voice rough, with shingles on the roof and a library filled with books. "Not this," he gestured to the dusty, sun-baked expanse around them, a life lived on the edge of peril. He believed she should leave, for her own sake. His internal struggle was mirrored, in an unexpected way, by the arrival of Lieutenant Alistair Finch, a young Army doctor dispatched from Fort Whipple to assess the sanitary conditions and medical readiness of the outlying settlements. Dr. Finch was everything Everett Cole was not: polished, articulate, with smooth, uncalloused hands and a vocabulary filled with the latest medical jargon from the East. He was courteous to a fault, his gaze often lingering on Clara with an open admiration that was both flattering and unsettling. He spoke of Boston with a familiar fondness, of concerts and lectures, of a world where intellect was prized and life's edges were softened by civilization. He represented, quite clearly, the path not taken, the safety Everett felt he himself could never provide. Clara found herself engaged in conversations about medical advancements she'd only read about, a stimulating intellectual spar that was undeniably appealing. Yet it also served to highlight the chasm between that world and the one she now inhabited. A world where Everett's quiet pragmatism and deep understanding of the land often meant the difference between life and death. Dr. Finch, with his neat uniform and earnest pronouncements, began to spend more time at the clinic than strictly necessary for his official duties, often under the pretext of discussing medical protocols or offering assistance. Clara couldn't fault his intentions. He was kind, intelligent, and clearly capable. But his presence created a subtle tension, an unspoken question mark hanging in the dry desert air. Was this the life she was meant for? A life of cultured companionship, of professional respect within established institutions, a return to the civilized world. The decision, however, was abruptly deferred by a far more immediate threat. Riders from the south brought chilling news. La viruela, smallpox, was raging in the Mexican border towns and spreading north like a phantom scourge. Clara had seen the devastation of smallpox once in a Boston immigrant ward. The memory alone was enough to make her blood run cold. The Boston offer, Dr. Finch's polite attentions all faded into the background. "I can't leave now," she told Everett, her voice firm. "Not until this passes." Everett merely nodded, his eyes dark with a grim understanding. He knew this enemy, one that arrows and bullets couldn't stop. When the first cases appeared in a nearby Pima village fever, rash, the terrifying pustules, Clara and Everett moved with a desperate, synchronized urgency. Her small clinic became an isolation ward, every spare blanket and pallet pressed into service. Everett, with his militia and volunteers from the settlement, established a strict quarantine line, a protective cordon around the afflicted, his presence a bulwark against panic and despair. Dr. Finch, to his credit, offered his assistance, though his experience with such raw, under-resourced field conditions was clearly limited. He was meticulous about hygiene, but seemed overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the suffering and the lack of proper facilities. For 72 hours, Clara and Everett barely slept. She moved from patient to patient, bathing fevered brows, administering what little comfort she could, her knowledge pitted against a relentless foe. Everett was her shadow, her support, ensuring a supply of fresh water, wood for the fires to boil linens, and maintaining the grim discipline of the quarantine. He saw that food was brought for Clara, that she took moments to rest, his concern a silent, powerful force. They worked as one. Their earlier hesitations, their unspoken fears, burned away in the crucible of the epidemic. Clara saw Everett's profound connection to the native peoples, the way they trusted him, his quiet words of reassurance in their own tongues. He, in turn, witnessed the depth of her compassion, her unwavering courage in the face of a horrifying disease. Her hands, though gentle, imbued with an undeniable strength. When the epidemic finally began to recede, leaving sorrow and exhaustion in its wake, but also a community that had faced its demons together. An elderly Pima woman, whose grandchild Clara had nursed back from the brink, took Clara's chapped, weary hand. The old woman's eyes, ancient and wise, held a deep, knowing light. She said nothing, merely pressed a small, intricately beaded amulet into Clara's palm, and then, with a reverence that brought tears to Clara's eyes, touched Clara's forehead and whispered, "Nanahyotai nada," which Denali later translated as spirit healer. It was an anointing, a profound acceptance into the heart of this land and its people. It was in the quiet aftermath of this ordeal that Dr. Finch approached Clara. He spoke of her dedication, her skill, his admiration clear. "Clara," he began, his tone earnest, "you don't belong in a place like this. Not permanently. It's too harsh, too unforgiving. Come back east with me. I have prospects. We could build a life together, a good life, a civilized one. Marry me." Clara, the proposal hung in the air, a clear path to safety, to comfort, to the life she had been raised to expect. She looked at Alistair Finch, a good man, an honorable man, and then she thought of Everett, of the shared silences, the desperate battles, the quiet understanding that needed no words. She thought of the Pima grandmother's blessing, of Tesco's trusting smile, of Denali's steadfast loyalty. She gave Dr. Finch her answer gently but firmly. Later, she penned a letter to the Boston hospital. "Thank you for your most esteemed offer," she wrote. "But my work here is not yet done. Boston has many fine doctors and nurses. This land, for now, needs its warriors and its healers who are willing to stand with them." Her decision was soon tested in a way she could never have imagined. A stern-faced Army major arrived from Washington with a new set of orders for Captain Everett Cole. Tensions with certain Apache bands further south had escalated, fueled by broken treaties and encroachment on their lands. Everett, with his unique knowledge of the terrain and his rapport with some native factions, was ordered to lead a punitive expedition to guide the troops into the mountain strongholds. To effectively pacify the region, Everett listened to the orders, his face like stone. This was his nightmare revisited, to be an instrument of the very power that had so often betrayed the native peoples, the power he had once served with such devastating consequences to his own heart and Mourning Dove's family. To lead soldiers against those who might be kin, or allies of kin, was unthinkable. He refused, quietly, unequivocally. "I will not lead your men to slaughter. Major," he stated, My duty is to keep the peace on this border, not to wage war on people defending their homes. The major was incensed, refusing a direct order. Captain, that's tantamount to treason. You, a man of mixed blood yourself. Your loyalties have always been suspect. You'll be stripped of your command. Cole, court-martialed, word spread like wildfire. Everett, the steadfast protector, was now branded a half-traitor. Fear and uncertainty rippled through the settlement. It was Clara who stood before the major and the hastily convened military tribunal. She was not summoned as a witness. She simply appeared, her gaze unwavering, her voice clear and strong. Major, she began, addressing the panel of stern-faced officers. You speak of loyalty. Captain Cole has shown more loyalty to this land, to its people, all its people, and to the cause of true peace than any man I have ever known. He has held this fragile border together not with force, but with understanding, with courage, and with a profound respect for the lives you seem so quick to devalue. You want loyalty? Try trusting the only man who's kept this frontier from exploding without the benefit of your maps or your medals. He doesn't just know this land. He is this land. And his refusal is not an act of treason, but an act of profound conscience. Her words, impassioned and fearless, resonated in the tense room. She spoke of his bravery, his sacrifices, his unwavering commitment to protecting innocents on all sides. Denali and even Old Gray Willow, along with several prominent settlers, came forward to add their own testimonies to Everett's character. The outcome was uncertain for days. Everett faced the accusations with his usual stoic calm, though Clara could see the strain it took. Finally, a compromise was reached, influenced perhaps by Clara's fierce advocacy and the clear support Everett commanded locally. He was not court-martialed, but his official command of the territorial militia was suspended pending further review. In reality, little changed in his day-to-day authority. The men still looked to him. The community still relied on him. Washington, it seemed, recognized that a martyr was more dangerous than a quietly defiant captain. Through it all, Clara stood by him, their bond forged even stronger in this new fire. The wounds that didn't bleed, the old traumas and the fresh assaults on their spirits had not broken them. Instead, they had revealed the unyielding strength of their shared commitment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and amethyst, Clara found Everett by the river, skipping stones across the water. A rare moment of quiet contemplation for him. She stood beside him, their shoulders barely touching. "They don't understand you," she said softly. He turned, his granite eyes holding a new warmth, a deep, abiding tenderness as he looked at her. "But you do, Clara." "Yes," she whispered. "I do." He reached for her hand, his grip strong and sure, no longer tentative, no longer holding back. The house with shingles and the library full of books might never be theirs, not in the way the world defined it, but here, under the vast Arizona sky, with the taste of dust and the scent of cedar in the air, they had found something far more precious, a home built not of timber and stone, but of courage, resilience, and a love that had taken root in the hardest of grounds. The aftermath of Everett Cole's quiet defiance against the military brass and Clara Whitmore's impassioned defense of him settled over the outpost like a long, slow exhalation. The threat of his removal, though officially suspended, had galvanized the community. Settlers and native peoples alike had found a common voice in their support for the captain and the nurse who had, against all odds, become the steadfast spine of their fragile world. There was a sense that something had been irrevocably forged in that crucible, a loyalty not to distant flags or abstract orders, but to the land itself and to those who walked it with integrity. Life, as it always does, found its rhythm again. But it was a new rhythm, deeper and more resonant. The old, dilapidated clinic, a veteran of storms and strife, was slowly dismantled. In its place, with lumber hauled from distant mills and the combined labor of many hands, rose a new structure. It was still modest, built of sturdy new pine that smelled fresh and clean, but it was larger, with separate rooms for examination, recovery, and even a small, meticulously organized dispensary. Everett, with a surprising knack for mechanics, even rigged up a clever ceiling fan in the main ward, powered by a patient old horse plodding in a circle outside, a touch of frontier ingenuity that brought blessed relief during the sweltering summer months. Behind the new clinic, nestled amongst a burgeoning patch of wild sage that Clara carefully tended, they built their own small cabin. It wasn't grand, just 2 rooms, a sturdy stone hearth, and a wide porch that faced the sunrise. There was no formal wedding, no pronouncements before a preacher. Their vows had been made in shared peril, in unspoken understanding, in the quiet joining of their hands after Everett's confession under the stars. Their commitment was etched into the lines around their eyes, into the way they moved in comfortable synchronicity, a silent language understood by all who knew them. This small cabin, with the scent of sage drifting through its open windows, was their testament. Their work expanded. Denali, the bright Navajo girl whose life Clara had touched so profoundly, became her most trusted assistant. Her gentle hands and keen observational skills a bridge between Clara's science and the traditional healing arts. Tesco, there our boy, now a sturdy lad of 5 or 6, chattered happily in a mixture of English and Apaches, equally at home trailing after Everett on his patrols, or sitting at Clara's feet as she taught the settlement's children their letters and numbers in the shade of the clinic porch. They began, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, to train other young Native women and men as medical aides, blending Clara's knowledge of hygiene and basic procedures with their innate understanding of local herbs and remedies. It was a slow, patient process, a weaving together of 2 worlds. As the heat of summer mellowed into the golden hues of early autumn, the communities came together for a harvest festival, a tradition as old as the land itself, under a vast, moonlit sky, the air alive with the scent of roasting corn and piñon smoke. The normally disparate groups mingled. Settlers shared bread with Pima families. Navajo children played chasing games with the freckled offspring of homesteaders. Everett, to Clara's quiet surprise and immense pride, was invited by the Apache elders to sit with them at the great ceremonial drum, as his strong hands joined the others, beating out the ancient, hypnotic rhythms that pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth. Clara felt a profound sense of peace. A small girl, Nalin's daughter, shyly approached Clara and placed a delicate necklace of iridescent bluebird feathers around her neck. A soft, whispered thank you accompanying the gift. Later that night, as the music shifted, a lone flute began to trill a haunting, melodic tune, its notes weaving through the thrum of the drums. It wasn't the structured waltz of a Boston ballroom, nor the lively reel of a frontier barn dance. This was something else, something wilder, more elemental. Everett rose and came to where Clara sat, his hand outstretched. She looked up, a question in her eyes. He simply smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that made her heart ache with a sweet, fierce tenderness. She placed her hand in his. They moved to the center of the firelit clearing, and for the first time, they danced. It was not a dance of practiced steps, but of instinct, of feeling, their bodies swaying to the ancient music, their movements a reflection of the wind sighing through the cottonwoods, of the river flowing over smooth stones. They were a part of the land, a part of its people, their separate histories merging into a single, shared rhythm. A grizzled old prospector, a man who had seen more than his share of the West's harshness, leaned against a wagon wheel, watching them. He took a long draw from his pipe and remarked to the man beside him, his voice filled with a grudging wonder. Never seen a white woman look more like she belonged. The world outside, however, had not entirely forgotten them. One crisp autumn morning, another official-looking contingent arrived. This time, not with accusations, but with commendations, news of their frontier medical militia. The unique blend of community-based care and integrated traditions had reached Washington. The officials, impressed and perhaps a little bewildered by the success of this unorthodox outpost, spoke of replication, of systemization. They offered Clara a prestigious advisory position, a chance to help shape healthcare policy for the territories from a comfortable office back east. Clara listened politely, her gaze drifting towards the open clinic door where Denali was patiently showing Tesco how to properly bandage a doll's broken arm. She thought of the feather necklace, so light against her skin, of the feel of Everett's hand in hers as they danced under the moon. When the officials had finished their lengthy proposal, she smiled, a serene, knowing expression. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I thank you for your confidence, but I fear I must decline. You see," she paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I already belong to a nation. It just doesn't show on any map." The officials, nonplussed but ultimately accepting, eventually departed, leaving Clara and Everett to the life they had chosen, the life they had built from bones, roots, and the unwavering strength of the wind. Not long after, a young journalist, sent out from a New York paper to capture tales of the Wild West, found his way to their outpost. He was full of questions, fascinated by this educated Boston nurse who had seemingly vanished into the wilderness. After observing their life for several days, the bustling clinic, the children's laughter during their outdoor lessons, the quiet companionship between Clara and Everett, he asked her the question that was clearly on his mind. "Miss Whitmore," he began, notebook poised, "forgive me, but do you ever miss the city, the theaters, the libraries, the civilization?" Clara was mending one of Everett's buckskin shirts on the porch, the late afternoon sun warm on her face. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the vast expanse of the desert sky. A gentle smile touched her lips. "The city," she said, her voice imbued with a quiet, unshakable certainty, "was where I learned to save lives. This," she gestured to the sprawling landscape, to the distant mountains hazed with purple, to the sound of Tesco's joyous shrieks as Everett swung him high in the air near the corral. "This is where I learned to live mine." The journalist wrote it down, though he suspected his readers back east would never truly understand. The story of Clara and Everett didn't end there, for stories in such lands never truly end. They simply become part of the wind, part of the dust, part of the enduring silence of the saguaros. On many an evening, as the sun bled its fiery colors across the western horizon, They could be seen riding out together, Everett on his sturdy buckskin, Clara on a spirited mare he had gentled for her. Sometimes Tesco, grown taller now, would race after them on his own shaggy pony, his delighted calls of Dr. Mama, Captain Cole, echoing through the vast, open spaces. The wind, ever present, would tug at their hair, streaked now with the dust of countless shared journeys, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, a constant reminder of the wild, beautiful, and unyielding land that had claimed them, and to which they so profoundly and finally belonged. So what do y'all think? Was Clara just a runaway from the East, or a woman brave enough to stake her heart where the map ends? And Everett, was he just a wounded man hiding in shadows, or the only soul strong enough to carry a love like hers? I'd love to hear what you felt. Drop a comment down below. Don't be shy. Your words mean more than gold dust out here. And if this kind of storytelling tugs at something in you, hit that subscribe button and come ride with us for more tales of grit, grace, and wild Western love.